Privacy. Everyone must reveal everything to the government, including their own lives, but also their thoughts. Any attempt to be opaque is equivalent to a crime. This crime is called thought crime. To ensure the purity of the nation's thoughts, thought police lurk everywhere in the crowd. As ordinary people, they secretly observe the people's every move, and ready to arrest those hidden rebels. Except for criminals who are thrown into prison. Few people have actually seen the thought police, but everyone has a common consensus that no one can escape the arrest of the thought police. Anyone with ideological problems, no matter how deeply they hide, will be caught. This is a fictional political thriller. It is said that everyone who watches it will be shocked. Those who have the courage to watch this movie are true warriors. In 1984 World Cup, were divided into 3 superpowers, were Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia. The 3 countries were in constant disputes. Among them, Oceania was due to years of war. The original social structure was broken. The whole country was under high-pressure rule. The ruling party here is called Ingsoc, and the only leader is the so-called Big Brother. Big Brother appears on electronic screens every day, and even in every citizen's home. His eyes stare at everyone through the screen. So there is a famous saying in Oceania, Big Brother is watching you. But who is Big Brother? No one knows. Whether he exists or not is even questionable. It's likely that it's just a government-created spiritual leader. The government of Oceania is divided into 4 departments, which are the Ministry of Peace, the Ministry of Love. But the actual functions of these 4 departments are completely opposite: manufacturing conflicts, violent suppression, and tampering news, and ignorance of the people. Although the rule of Oceania is impeccable, no matter how sophisticated a machine is, there will be a few parts that fail. Winston is one of them. As a staff member of the Ministry of Truth, Winston's daily work is to constantly create fake news, from daily necessities to international situations. Nothing in the newspapers is true. All of them are fabricated by the government. And fake news. For a person with a normal mind and judgment, it's hard for a person with normal mind and judgment to be suspicious. In Oceania, most people's memory lasts no more than 7 seconds. Or only remember what the party wants them to remember. Winston didn't have the patience to do so. He felt pain in this world full of lies. But the only way he can express resistance and doubt is at home, the blind spot where the surveillance cameras can't see. He secretly recorded his true thoughts in his diary. What is freedom? Freedom is being able to say 2 + 2 = 4. It seems like an obvious answer. But in Oceania, even the simplest arithmetic problem is whatever the party says it is. In such a world where black and white are reversed, of course, Winston wasn't the only one who saw the problem. But most people with ideas choose to be silent or hide. In this era, monitoring and thought police are everywhere. People often report each other, and even children report their parents. Has become a norm. Winston must be very careful. His neighbor Parsons is a typical example. For all the party's policies, he agrees and supports without thinking. See ma, he was afraid that one day he would accidentally say he would be taken away. Besides not showing opposition, opinion, he can't be too awake or too smart. The opposite example is Winston's colleague in the Ministry of Truth, Syme. He is the editor of the Newspeak Dictionary, an official dictionary, which has currently had 10 versions. The 11th edition is also coming out. The overall trend of these dictionaries is getting thinner, and the vocabulary is becoming simpler. Smythe's explanation is that the simpler the vocabulary, the more it will reduce people's thinking ability, making them obey without thinking and judging. Shortly after making these comments, Smythe disappeared from the world. Unlike other publicly executed political prisoners, Semi didn't even appear in the execution ground, and no one explained his disappearance. It seemed that nothing had happened, and this person did not exist. But Winston knew very well Semi had been dealt with. Although he was excellent at his job, and not a reactionary, the party didn't like people like him, because he was too smart and gullible. For the party, such people are more threatening than ordinary political prisoners. Taking this as a warning, Winston could only live cautiously, not to mention expressing any objections, or even show any tendency to think about the policy. He dared not, but even with such caution, he recently felt a deep unease, because he found that a strange female party member was always staring at him intentionally or not. He thought he must have exposed his disloyalty somewhere, exposed his disloyalty of thought. Before he knew it, he might have been doomed. For this situation, although Winston was scared, but he wasn't surprised. After all, writing a diary secretly is illegal. But things developed beyond his expectations. After work, a female party member gave Winston a note. Winston opened the note, which said "I love you," with just 3 simple words. But it stirred up a huge wave in Winston's heart. In Oceania, has long been a taboo nourishment. Love and reputation were regarded as a mental illness to be overcome. The only purpose of marriage is to reproduce for the country. Even if they are married, private affairs between men and women are not allowed. The only love allowed is only love for the party and the country. Winston had no feelings for his wife. His wife regularly urged Winston to sleep with her, but only to fulfill the fertility target. but because they never had children. So his wife left him early. The reason why they didn't divorce, it's because divorce is not allowed in Oceania. They have been separated for over 10 years. Shortly after receiving the note, the woman came to Winston again and made a request for a date in the suburbs. In Oceania, such private dates are certainly not allowed. But knowing the risk, Winston did not refuse. He arrived at the designated place on time. There was no pervasive surveillance here. The two people, they can show their true sides without any scruples. The girl's name is Julia, works in the Ministry of Truth, but in fact, she has two completely different faces. Her loyalty to the party she shows to the outside world is a convenient cover for her actions. He is not a celibate, but also has considerable experience in both sexes. She has had hundreds of experiences and indulged in them. Winston doesn't care. Julia's private life is not clean. For him, indiscreetness is a good thing. He was fed up with his wife's attitude towards sex as work. What he wants is a woman with desires and reactions. They were in love, blending together in the blue sky and wilderness. The long-lost release made Winston feel the taste of life. After that, they started dating frequently. Winston met a hotel owner in the slums, where he rented a room as a secret meeting place for their dates. During their relationship, Julia brought Winston many surprises. For example, he could use his connections and channels. He could get sugar that only core party members could enjoy. Bread, coffee, tea, and other things in the current Oceania. Ordinary people and peripheral party members can only eat chemically synthesized food. The truly healthy and delicious food is only for special supply. In addition, he also got a dress and lipstick. She dressed up in a unique way, which made Winston stare at her. Dressing up is also prohibited. In Oceania, the women Winston can see in life are all women who have lost their gender characteristics. At Julia's place, he can briefly forget the political pressure without obeying orders and doesn't have to act cautiously. He can do whatever he wants and say what he wants, but once he returns, the external pressure will come overwhelmingly. Recently, the world situation has undergone great changes. With the development of the war, Oceania and Eurasia became allies again, and became enemies with East Asia. But Oceania recently announced that it had always been an ally of East Asia. But this time, it suddenly changed. The impact is conceivable. Although the Ministry of Truth is used to tampering history, but the amount of work is really not small. It needs to tamper with the entire society over the years in all aspects of propaganda. With Winston and his colleagues almost non-stop over time, they barely completed the project. After completing this project, Upton felt a deep sense of boredom. In this world full of lies, everything seemed ugly and meaningless. The seed of resistance gradually sprouted in his heart. A bold idea emerged in his mind. But this idea had been in his mind for a long time. In Oceania, there was a well-known reactionary named Goldstein. He was one of the early leaders of the Socialist Revolution. Later, he betrayed the revolution and was imprisoned, but escaped before being executed. He secretly led an underground resistance organization to clear the influence of Goldstein. Oceania had a special custom. 2 minutes hate. The government plays good Stein's speeches every day. Speech videos of good Stein to incite the hatred of the masses, whether the audience was real or pretended, would show a gnashing of teeth hatred gesture. Winston also imitated it, but it was all just an act. At some moments, he still shows inner exhaustion. He noticed that there was someone else like him, and the other person also noticed Winston. In a brief eye contact, they seemed to understand each other's thoughts. The person who resonated with Winston was named O'Brien. Unlike Winston, who is a peripheral party member, he is a core member of the inner party and a senior cadre. For the core members, Winston didn't have a good impression of them, but O'Brien gave him a rather different feeling. He didn't have that arrogant bureaucratic demeanor. He was polite in dealing with people, revealing a gentle and elegant sense of power. And many years ago, he was walking at night. He passed by O'Brien. With a calm tone, said a baffling sentence. "We will meet in a place without darkness." Winston still doesn't understand the meaning of the words Oberon said to him suddenly, but that sentence made him regard O'Brien as a comrade in his heart. A recent incident has made him more convinced of this. Oberon took the initiative to talk, saying that he admired one of his articles. In that article, used many words from the old dictionary. So he wanted to give him a new dictionary, and invited him to come and pick it up. When talking about this, Oberon specifically mentioned that he had talked to Semi about Winston. Winston thought it was a strong signal, because Semi had long since disappeared, which shouldn't be mentioned anymore. O'Brien specifically mentioned that he seemed to be suggesting something. Winston even thought that Oberon was probably the one. The resistance organization. The situation is throwing an olive branch to him. Although he knew it was dangerous, Winston still made up his mind. But before taking the risk, he wanted to persuade Julia to leave him. After all, the road ahead was uncertain. But Julia refused the request on the spot. They also agreed that, no matter what situation they were in, they would not betray each other. With a nervous mood, Winston came to O'Brien's office. Everything here seemed orderly. O'Brien sat inside, and giving orders, where he controlled the life and death of others. It was Winston's first time to come to this place. Winston couldn't help feeling a little nervous. O'Brien asked Winston to sit down, and asked the waiter to pour a glass of red wine. This kind of item is only for core party members. Winston had never tasted it before. When he was hesitating how to speak, O'Brien got up and turned off the electronic screen on the wall. Winston was shocked. He never thought that the screen could be turned off. The privileges of core members exceeded his imagination. At O'Brien's signal, Winston sat down tremblingly. He got straight to the point. Goldstein. The resistance organization led by Goldstein does exist. He was one of them. The way the organization exists was somewhat different from Winston's imagination. To avoid being wiped out, they don't have a specific list of members. What ties them together is only an ideal and a belief. They firmly believe that Big Brother's rule will eventually be overthrown. As for when that future will come, no one knows. O'Brien pointed out a path full of hardships. But Winston chose to join without hesitation. Although the road ahead is long, he felt the calling of his ideal, another unprecedented passion, was surging in his heart. O'Brien approved Winston's joining, and then handed him the dictionary on the table. The conversation was short, but Winston had already got what he wanted. He went home. He opened the dictionary in the blind spot of the monitor. There was a secret hidden inside. The dictionary looked normal on the surface, but in the interlayer of the inner pages, there hides the work of Goldstein. The book criticized the current government of Oceania and the political situation. Like dissecting a cow, it reveals the true logic behind the policy. For example, the purpose of the war in Oceania is not for the war itself, but to use war to keep the whole society in a tense state. Only in such a social state can poverty and ignorance be maintained for a long time. People have no ability or energy to think about anything. Only can they accept slavery with peace of mind. This book reveals many of Winston's troubling questions. On their first date, Winston unknowingly stayed up all night. At dawn, outside the window, a female worker downstairs was singing. There was a free and unrestrained joy in the song. At this moment, Winston felt that she was beautiful, and she had the vitality of a worker. This made Winston couldn't help but feel, the future belongs to them. While we are already dead, you are indeed dead. A sudden voice caused Winston's blood to freeze. He turned around to check, but found no source of the sound. Until the voice appeared again, commanding them to stand in the room. Only then did Winston realize the voice came from behind the wall. The landscape painting on the wall fell down, revealing the electronic screen hidden behind it. It turned out that the private space they thought was just an illusion. Big Brother's eyes were still staring at them from behind. The sound of the propeller was getting closer. The thought police broke in. Julia was arrested. Winston stood trembling in place. Suddenly footsteps came from downstairs again. The hotel owner walked into the room and looked Winston in the eyes. Only then did Winston realize they had been exposed from the beginning. Winston met his cellmate Parsons in prison. In his impression, the photographer always supported all the party's orders, and was a die-hard party member. However, the photographer told him that he wasn't that loyal to Big Brother. But this disloyalty, which he himself didn't realize, he was arrested, because one day, he shouted in his sleep to overthrow Big Brother. This sentence was heard by his daughter, and immediately reported it to the thought police. He didn't hate his daughter, but was proud of his choice to betray his daughter. He timely discovered the signs in his mind. However, his repentance attitude failed to save him from his fate. Not long after, the thought police took him away. Subsequently, Winston saw a familiar face again. Bob Lang was shocked. He also had the composure to face his fate. This is what a revolutionary must have. Mental preparation. However, things developed beyond his expectations again. With a word from O'Brien, the police beside him immediately hit Winston with a stick. Then O'Brien took out the surveillance photos of pictures of Winston and Julia, which will be used as negative examples to warn the nation. Until this time, Winston realized that it was all a hoax. O'Brien's various disguises were all lies made up for fishing law enforcement. After the truth was revealed, what awaited Winston was round after round of torture. But the purpose of torture is not to extract information, because the party has always known his behavior well. So, they didn't need to get any information from him. The purpose of torture is to treat Winston. Although Winston's fate was certain death. But according to the party's policy, before executing Winston, he must be transformed ideologically, to make him abandon his past delusions, repent for his mistakes, and die with loyalty and gratitude to Big Brother. In Winston's diary, expounds his understanding of freedom, is being able to say 2 + 2 = 4. O'Brien started from this point, and conducted targeted treatment. He raised 4 fingers and asked Winston what it was. Winston insisted it was 4. After being tortured again and again, he finally changed his answer to 5, but the torture didn't stop. O'Brien knew that. He changed his answer just to please him. The purpose of treatment had not been achieved, until Winston was tortured to the point of delirium. He began to doubt his judgment, when his answers became hesitant and hesitant. O'Brien thought it was effective. The torture stopped in the next period. O'Brien continuously, personally humiliated Winston, and mental brainwashing, starting from basic common sense. He gradually shook Winston's belief in the truth. For example, he told him that gravity was a made-up pseudoscience. The stars in the sky don't really exist. The party made them exist. They exist. We can turn them off at will, like turning off a light. After Winston's will gradually disintegrated, the thought police began to make him confess his crimes. Besides having an affair with Julia, they also fabricated a bunch of charges, such as deliberate destruction of infrastructure, assassinating leaders, traitor, and even murdering his wife. Winston accepted them all, and according to the requirements of the thought police, to confess and review. By this point, Winston had completely lost the will to resist. But deep down inside, there was still a place that hadn't been occupied, which is his love for Julia. But this could not escape the eyes of the thought police. One day, Winston called Julia's name in his dream, revealing his thoughts. O'Brien was very dissatisfied with this, although Winston has now achieved absolute obedience. But it was still not enough. He must also love Big Brother with all his heart. Except for Big Brother, he couldn't have feelings for anyone else. Facing Winston, such a stubborn party disloyalist, O'Brien thought he must use strong measures to undergo the most thorough transformation. With a word from him, he sent Winston to room 101. Room 101 is a special place set up by the Ministry of Love, which is specifically used to deal with the most stubborn. The criminal law here is customized according to each prisoner's situation. One thing is the same. What is presented in room 101 will reflect everyone's deepest fear. Winston stared at the things on the table. He already felt the abyss approaching him. With the cloth on the cage being lifted, his whole body's pores suddenly exploded. The thing in front of him was a cage of furry mice. Winston's fear of mice originated from childhood memories. Due to years of war, the people faced a serious famine. The food in Winston's house at that time only had the last piece of chocolate. The whole family was dying of hunger. Winston grabbed the chocolate from his mother and rushed out. When he returned home again, he found that his mother and sister had starved to death. A swarm of mice was crawling all over their corpses. This scene became Winston's deepest nightmare. The moment he saw the mice, Winston completely gave up resistance. He just asked O'Brien what he wanted him to do. O'Brien didn't answer, and placed the cage in front of him, instead of opening the cage immediately. Instead, he took his time, and introduced the content of this punishment. These mice are used to eating human flesh. Once the cage is opened, they would immediately pounce on Winston's face. Seeing the mice getting closer, Winston felt a hysterical breakdown. Suddenly, he understood O'Brien's intention. He shouted the words as he wished. "Do it to her. I don't care what you do. I don't care what you do to her. Do it to her. Do it to Julia. I don't care what you do. I'm begging you, Dad. I don't care what you do. Do it to her." Finally, after giving up completely, Winston is free. Although he was about to be sentenced to death, but before the execution, he is free. Because Winston no longer posed any threat. He met Julia again in the tavern. He confessed that he had betrayed you. Julia's expression didn't show any surprise. She confessed to Winston that, "I have betrayed you long ago." They sat for a while, and said nothing to each other. Julia got up and left, telling Winston, "We must meet again later." Winston nodded in agreement. They still had many sins to confess. Winston sat alone in the tavern. He suddenly remembered something. He wrote the equation of 2 + 2 on the bar. However, after the equal sign, he was confused. He couldn't write anything. The screen in the tavern was showing news about political prisoners. The protagonist today was no one else. It was Winston. In the video, he confessed to himself all the non-existent crimes he had committed, expressing his gratitude to Big Brother. After Winston's confession, a news was inserted on the TV. Somehow, the enemy of Oceania changed from East Asia to Eurasia. The news enthusiastically announced that Ocean State had once again achieved a great victory. Looking at the screen, Winston showed a relieved smile. At this moment, no longer had doubts about the party's tampering with history. Only full devotion to the party. Even though he was a death row inmate, he sincerely felt proud of this great victory, and felt proud. Looking at the face of Big Brother, he no longer had resistance and awe, but only deep love. He was glad that he had finally been transformed. But he didn't know why. 2 lines of clear tears silently slipped from his eyes.